to click like, subscribe, the bell notification, and whatever else YouTube has you clicking on to support us.
Explosions! Color-coded heroes, rubber monsters getting totally rocked by teamwork. Super Sentai has been doing this since 1975, and this happened before CGI, streaming, or even 4K cameras were even a thing. But the question is, how much does it actually cost to produce a show at that time, or even the high-tech spectacle we have today? The honest answer, we really don't actually know. We can make a lot of inferences though. So before I get too far into this episode, welcome to Tokunomics. My name is Karelika Kane, and if you checked out our first episode on Tokunomics, which was regarding the end of Super Sentai and who we could or could not blame for this, this episode is going to be discussing how much it cost to make Super Sentai. So before I get too far in, I do want to say there's a little bit of a transparency problem. Through all of my research that I've been doing for the last few weeks, actually for more than a few weeks, Toei does not publicly release their production numbers. They don't give exact numbers. So this is a thing for the company. They don't have to, nor do they, apparently. But what you'll hear in this video is going to be estimates based on comparable television shows from TV productions in similar eras, using data that already exists, their trends from economics and inflation, and what Toei has publicly provided in financial reporting, which shows total revenues, but not pre-show breakdowns. And we're also going to take in any accounts from industry insiders that have shared things online during press conferences or interviews. But with that said, everything here is an educated guess based on this and not official documentation. I tried to see if I can find that, but unfortunately it's very tight-lipped and preventable from being shared. Once again, not all companies have to share everything to a T. You kind of hope they do for transparency's sake, but they don't have to. So anyone claiming, wow, I am great. Anyone claiming that they know the actual financials of Super Sentai budgets is either speculating or has access to data from Japan that I unfortunately will never access. Now, with that disclaimer out there, I do want to say, even with the inferences and educated guesses that we have, there is a lot of information that we can put together of what the cost of a TV show like Super Sentai is and what that is attributed to. So let's talk a little bit about the start of Super Sentai. I'm not going to go into the series. So for anybody who is looking for a little bit more on the actual television show, the characters, the monsters, the story, I definitely encourage you to check out all the videos that Kaiju has done, and I'll make sure that any playlists are attached in the links, or comment and pin them, so if you want to reference the series I talk about, you absolutely can. But let's first talk about the start of Super Sentai, which is Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger. That changed television. It was the third tokusatsu show of the triumvirate, so to speak. We had in the mid to late 60s, we had Ultraman, which started between 66 and 67. We had in 72 Kamen Rider, and then most recently from 75 on to today, we've had Super Sentai. Now, because of those three, there have been a lot of developments, trend setting, everything that is used in television today. But unlike Kamen Rider and Ultraman, Super Sentai has consistently aired for the last 50 years. So there's a lot that they have brought. A few of the things that I do want to highlight for the original Go Ranger is that everything was done in an era that was practical effects. There wasn't the ability to do CGI. Yes, they had the creative screening where you could have things in the foreground and have a screen in the background that showed other images, monsters, things like that of a larger size or anything like that. But explosions were actual pyrotechnics. Editing meant physically cutting the film, playing around with it. And monsters were, truthfully, many still to this day, actors in latex suits. So where was the cost? Where was the financials of this? So if we look at their contemporaries, like Kamen Rider, which is a little bit more out there with financials, even though they're also subsequently owned by Toei, they were operating in similar environments. So one of the things that they were able to take from is a lot of the pyrotechnics, a lot of the setups, a lot of the expertise that they developed from starting with Kamen Rider, they were able to lead into this, which is an incredible cost-cutting measure. So they didn't have to figure out how to build pyrotechnics, how to build those sets, understanding how to cut and edit film, which is a huge cost burden for any production. And so since you already had those avenues taken care of from another show, it helped to really create this process. So looking at Japanese TV drama of that era, it typically ranged widely in budget depending on the network and the time slots. Labor costs in 75 were also significantly lower than today because the cost of living and production schedules were very intensive. So you would have heard a lot of stories, even some actors in the last 10 years talk about how they are working 10 to 15 hours a day to get through things. So thinking about it from 50 years ago, that was still held true, even more so. So the financial cost of doing that was extensive because you had to have a lot of time, you had to have a lot of film crew, staff, sets, everything. So based on industry patterns for other action-oriented children's programming in 1970s Japan, episodes likely fell in the range of, in American dollars, roughly between 75 to 150,000 per episode. I'll get in a little bit more about that later on, but we're looking at tens of thousands of dollars for everything that they're doing. And without hard numbers, we have to go backwards on what we're thinking. So what we do know is productions had to be lean. Japan is known for lean manufacturing, or a Kaizen method. If you don't know much about that, I'm not going to school everyone on Kaizen, because even though I love it, as it is a great lean manufacturing strategy, I would definitely recommend, if you're interested, look at it a little bit further on lean manufacturing. It's where you only hold on to the bare minimum of what you need to get through whatever it might be, for a television show, for an assembly line, everything. You don't hoard a lot of stuff. You keep it as minimum as possible, which works for the Japanese culture. Sets and props are reused all the time. If you are an eagle-eyed fan who has watched all of these shows, you may be able to pick apart all of the sets, all the costumes, all the weapons, all of the different molds that have been used before in different shows. And the value came from how you were able to build everything creatively and through stunt coordination. So taking advantage of what you already had on hand versus building big, expansive things via technology. So let's talk a little bit about inflation. So I'm going to read a little bit more of what I had pulled from some of my data here. If we converted the Japanese yen from 1975 to 2025, it would essentially be 3 to 5 times greater than the yen is today compared to 1975. So some of the things that we are looking at is that the data for general consumer prices, so cost of goods that people buy on a daily basis, is double what it was in 1975, which is quite significant because I think that's across the board everywhere in the world. However, TV productions don't track the same. However, if you think consumer data has doubled, you have to think about specialty goods such as film, such as costume making, so the latex, the cloth, everything that you don't use for regular day-to-day items has grown significantly. So some of the things that are special when we're looking at the cost of any type of franchise and series is the specialized labor. So even in 1975 till today, you have VFX or video effects artists, stunt coordinators, stunt teams that command a little bit of a higher rate. So anything that is niche, that you can't get a dime a dozen, so to speak, is going to cost you a little bit more. Stunt coordinators specifically, because you have a lot of health and safety, you have to make sure that you don't inadvertently kill anyone or hurt anyone. And we've heard through a lot of interviews and back end of television shows where actors and actresses, stunt artists and things like that have gotten hurt from production. So these coordinators are responsible for ensuring that doesn't happen or minimize the risk as much as possible. Then you have today, more so than you had in 1975, something to think about cost-wise, and that is newer safety regulations. So where you had Sonny Chiba or Kenji Oba, specifically Kenji Oba, who did his own stunts, specifically in Gavan and his 2 times in Super Sentai, he specifically did a lot of his own stunts, and many of the early era Sentai actors did the same. So today, most of the actors and actresses that are not in costume, if they do any stunts, it is highly choreographed, and when needed, they replace them with a stunt double because they want to ensure they prevent any injury or reduce risk. This is also why sometimes a lot of costume fights do turn into CGI messes, because of the fact that you are trying to prevent human lives from being injured. It does take away from what people consider quality of the narrative by not having actual people fight, but there is a safety regulation that goes into it. It's one of the reasons why Jackie Chan, when he came to Hollywood, would complain at times about the fact that he could not do the same stunts that he did in China and Hong Kong. So technology costs also are much different today than back in the 70s because we have higher powered cameras. We have the ability to do new editing software. We can have drones. We can have so many different unique opportunities that we didn't have in 75. So this does play into that inflation problem. But with that in mind, the cost, as I said, for these episodes based on comparable series back in 1975 could range between $50,000 to $150,000 per episode, which is still quite expensive in the grand scheme of things. And this is taking in 1975 numbers and not translating it to modern time. I'll get a little bit more when I translate to what it is today. So the bottom line really is that inflation does affect any production when we're looking at old versus new. But it's important to understand old versus new, because when we're looking at it from a business perspective of costs, we really want to understand where we started to where we are to see what we're doing to reduce the cost and to ensure that we're improving the quality. Now, if we fast forward 50 years on forward, we're looking at something that is fundamentally different today than it is in the past, and looking at Go-Juger, or even past series of Boom Boomger and King-Oger. They utilized LED wall technology. Specifically, King-Oger was huge with this. So they had that video wall technology that is something that was unheard of. And they built that so that they could create a virtual CGI environment that actors are able to engage in, but they don't have to physically create those sets as they may have done in the past. And through these, it shifted the budgets from going out on location to putting it in for the digital asset creation. So those are things that you also have to think about. I know Kaiju has made the complaint from a lot of her recent series is that there's not as fun of location shots as they had in the past. Even Akiba Ranger still had those fun shots where you could go to the quarry or anything like that. And by transferring those costs, they don't have to worry about any kind of permits, ensuring that crowds are not standing around, and reducing any kind of unknown factors that they can take advantage of with this digital wall technology, that they have everything within control and just need to figure out how to create those digital assets, and to ensure that their actors, their physical actors, like their regulars, their stunt actors, and everybody who is engaging in the scene can understand what they're doing with anything that may not physically exist with them. Then we have the post-production complexity. So back in the 70s, we did have elements of having post-production where you'd see like those lightning bolts, or you'd see the beams for like any kind of guns or things like that, or the sparks on weapons. Those effects were still expensive and still timely at that age, but now utilizing digital assets and utilizing technology has helped them get a lot cheaper, so that you can create it once and just constantly replicate, versus having to physically put it into a film print each and every time and ensuring that it's coded exactly where you want in the film print. Now you can code digitally to make it much quicker. Then you have advanced suit engineering. So modern suits compared to prior series, you could do 3D imaging now to actually scan the stunt performer's body, physicality. Same thing with even the actors, if they ever have to be in suit without their helmet, to ensure that it fits their body. That's why you'd see in older series where sometimes these suits would look a little baggy or a little unfitted in the groin area or in the armpit area or anything like that. And that's because sometimes where they would measure, it's not perfect, unfortunately. You can even have tailors who do this for a living say that there's always going to have to be multiple fittings. And if you tailor it to one body shape and then have somebody take over at a later time, you have ill-fitting garments, where now you can do these 3D image scans before you even start making the garment, so that if you do need to recast or change anything of who's going to be wearing what, You don't have to physically make it at the start. You could have it scanned and then produce it later on, which does make it a little bit more sophisticated. Same thing with utilizing different materials and engineering it through creative things. A lot of the original costumes back in the 60s and 70s, admittedly, but more so for Super Sentai in the 70s, would even utilize non-traditional things such as foam or cardboard to make the costumes, where today they can tailor it, where they can use like chrome type fabrics and the like. So the next thing is you now have new roles that never existed in the 70s, such as digital workflow managers, data wranglers, who are collecting all these assets, all these musical frames, anything that is needed. And what does this cost? So once again, don't have official numbers, but I'm going to read to you what I put together. And the reason I'm going to read it to you is because I don't memorize anything, so I'm going to read it verbatim so I don't mess it up. So when we look at something comparable, even though it's a little bit different, Japanese anime. A Japanese anime can range roughly between 10 to 15 million yen per episode, which is roughly $67,000 to $100,000 for standard productions, to much higher for premium shows. So if you think of your indie anime from an indie studio, it's going to be on the lower end. And then if you think of something like Production IG, where they're putting everything into it, think of Ghost in a Shell. Anything that they know they're going to get a high return on the investment, they're going to put more money into it, so it can be closer to 100K, if not more. Then when we're thinking of live action Japanese drama in those prime slots for daytime or evening, they roughly report between 300 to 400 million yen, which for US dollars is between $200,000 and $270,000. So that is, when you take those together, that is what we're looking at for a sweet spot of today. Now, to be fair, we could be looking closer for today, closer to that $275,000 mark, because you have the costumes, you have the stunt coordination, you have the actors who are looking at higher returns, different things like that. So we're going to be looking at higher amounts of money. And given that production complexity, once again, for modern Sentai is more, we're going to be more expensive and more unconservative with our dollar amounts. So when I get into the next episode of Ranger, I'm going to take comparable shows and actually give you a little bit closer to dollar amounts to help set the stage of what it looks like, especially when we get into Power Rangers, because Power Rangers, unlike Super Sentai, did share their financials a little bit more publicly. So you also have to think of how Super Sentai works. Once again, when I talk about Ranger for my first full series cost model, I'll go into a little bit more of the background of it, but an important thing to think about when we're looking at Super Sentai is this is very much like the shows from the 70s and 80s for American kids that had the Saturday morning cartoons, such as He-Man, Thundercats, Transformers, and so many more. The model is based on one pivotal thing, and that is how can we make money toy-wise. So a lot of times, even still to today, the concept of the gimmick and the toys are made in advance of what the show will be about. That's why even when Gaim was originally starting to be announced and before it was released, we found out it was going to be fruit-based. And so everybody at that time thought of Fruit Ninja because of that being the big thing. So we knew fruit-based, but we did not know it was going to be fruit-based samurai warriors or anything like that. So you have all of that. So with the combination of Toei and Bandai, they work together to identify a show. They have the name, they have the gimmick, Then they start building from there of how it can work. So it's always going to be a merchandise-driven model. And the earlier series kept it very simple. When we think of Gold Ranger, we had the 5 core Rangers. We had their weapons. We had their team attack, which was the color changing. I'm going to call it football. I know it was a little bit different, but you had those types of things. So it was very simplistic in what it shared toy-wise. Then when we get to things like today with Gojuger, you have the rings first and foremost for all the reds across all the respective series. Then you have the core team's rings. Then you have the henshin device, the changer. Then you have the figures. Then you have the mechs. And you have 5 different mechs because Tega Sword merges with the 5 different Rangers. So you have all of that. You have a lot more of a library of toys. So the model is really going to be based on how are we going to create a very long toy commercial. So production costs are going to be anything that helps justify the toy marketing. So how are we going to sell this toy? How are we going to encourage and make it where kids want to have this toy, this figure, this anything in their hands? And alongside that, you also want to think, how are we going to ensure that it still stays attractive to kids? So you have to think about how to make the toys appealing, how to market it, and how to make your weekly 25-30-minute commercial stay true to keep kids engaged without feeling like the parents are starting to break the bank, which is why you have different things come out at different periods of time. Especially if you think of the American culture for Christmas being the biggest moneymaker for toy sales, that's why you'll have specialty toys usually get targeted closer to the Christmas time, because you know that's when kids are going to start wanting to ask for those things. So that's why you'll see kids get commercials for the big thing that'll come out closer to Christmas starting in October, so that when they're building their lists for Santa by November and mid-December, they can start getting into their parents' ears. So that's how it was done even back then, and still somewhat to the point today. So the other thing to think about is, lastly, and apparently I lost my page, is what, give me one moment, because apparently it fell away. Okay, so with that being said, the end result of Super Sentai is really going to be that it's made with a bare bones budget. They take advantage of what they have built today, such as the sets, the miniatures, the pyrotechnics, the kits that they need to rinse and repeat. And with that, they're able to make it where it's significantly user-friendly, incredibly repetitive, and stays on that lean method to make it work. It's not an overly expensive show. It's not even a show that is going to wow people Oscar-wise. But it is, or Emmy, I guess. But it is a show that is going to keep it fundamentally straightforward and keeping in mind what it is at the heart of it, a long toy commercial. And with that, looking at the cost, I do want to remind everybody that any factors and figures I put into this video are truthfully educated guesses. I do not have official numbers. I wish I could get official numbers. And just to remember, in all future episodes, everything will still be best guesses. And if you like this episode, please do continue watching. I hope to bring this out weekly, talking about the different series. I'm starting with Super Sentai only because Right now, I know that's the big thing that everybody is talking about because it's coming to an end, but I'm hoping soon to talk about Ultraman, Kamen Rider, Garo, maybe even including any of the tokusatsu shows that are underrepresented, be it Metal Heroes or shows that come from other countries. And then I will also be incorporating into it, when I can, Power Rangers, because I think that is important to discuss, and other things that can come into the economic landscape, be it how writing, directing, and production can affect the success of a show, how toy sales can affect the success of the show. And knowing that now Disney Plus is going to be creating their own Power Rangers show without the utilization of assets from Super Sentai, what the cost will be of doing that. So thank you again. This is Tokunomics. I'm Corella Cocaine, and I look forward to checking in with you next time. Bye!